right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we have Keith Boney. Did I say that right?
I pronounce it Bonnet. It is
Bonnet.
commonly
Okay.
said Boney, so I don't
All right.
take offense to it.
All right. Keith Bonnet. Joining us, who is a user researcher at Bethesda. Keith, if you want to give a little bit of intro to yourself and like kind of what you do.
Yeah, so as I said, user researcher at Bethesda. More specifically, my team is kind of more in the publishing side of the company. So we're very much in the middle. And we work with the different studios. And as far as my role, basically synthesizing all of the player feedback that we get and making sure that we highlight the most common pain points or areas of opportunity and write up those reports so that we can get them to the producers and the devs so that they can make decisions on what areas of the game that they might need to prioritize at any given time.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, so that's already like there are some like preconceptions I had about what you do that you've already just proven wrong from that intro. So like, all right, I'm excited for this now. All right, so this is where do we sign up for those Doom the Dark Ages kin codes? I'm like the beta codes. That's the only discount for us, right?
So funny. I think I don't know if it's a Bethesda thing or a Microsoft thing, maybe a little bit of both. So one of our job perks is that we end up getting whatever the highest edition of the game is, like with the collectibles and all of that. Right. We usually get that, but then we also get like studio tokens.
Okay.
So if I am saying that correctly, we essentially have access to about 3 copies of the game.
All right. Say no more, fam.
Yeah.
I don't need you to say nothing else. It's like this being recorded, and then your boss will call you like, yo, what you out here telling people?
Yeah, for sure. But we can talk.
Yeah. All right. So user research, like you already kind of hinted that it's a really interesting niche that like people like might not immediately think of when they think of like just making a video game. So what drew you to that role?
So that's a really funny question. I didn't even know that user research was a thing until I saw it on an Instagram post like 2 years ago.
Like to apply for the job?
Just as a job function at all. Like I just had no idea about it. I didn't know about the world of UX. I just like research is from a more historical context, just me as a person, I don't like to define myself by my role.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way that I live my life, I am a researcher. Like I ask questions about everything. So with that natural inclination, my job searches throughout my career history has always kind of went back into, oh, let me try to find something in research. But then there was the limitations of, oh, if you want to do academic research, then you basically have to go the doctoral route in academia. So that was kind of a hard no. And then the other side of research usually led to like labs for like chemistry, biology, oncology, like all of those different scientific, like hard sciences.
Yeah.
And that was very much outside of my purview as well. So I just got to a point where I just did another search. I was like, okay, there has to be some type of research that's not one of those two. And then that Instagram post finally enlightened me. And I just kind of went head first into the whole, all right, let's figure out what user experience is and make that work.
Okay. So you just like researching, you just like studying and just like learning more.
Yeah, basically. And the other part is just kind of further understanding people. Because I mean, we all share this world. So I like to I think the best way, or at least for me, one of the easier ways to form relationships is to just understand people.
Okay. I can see how. Oh, okay. I think I'm starting to see how a user researcher drew you.
Yeah.
Right. So like from the time that you like spent in the role, what would you say is like your high level idea of like, yo, here's what this job does, and like here's like how you fit into the team.
So just at different stages of development, and that sometimes will change how much our work is prioritized. But at different stages of development, we're essentially matching design intent with player expectations.
Okay.
So whenever we find those mismatches, those are generally the areas of opportunity, whether it is, okay, design intent is a little off, maybe that should adjust in favor of what the player is saying. And then on the other side, it's, okay, you design something, people have free will, they're going to do whatever they want with it. So then it's like, okay, if the players are kind of bucking up against the design intent, then that kind of informs marketing to better strategize on how to communicate the design intent.
Right. Interesting. Okay. What's that next one's gonna be? Okay. So like actually this question. So like are you just sort of cycling between projects, so you're jumping like, all right, so like here's like the research thing we need to do for like game 1, for game 2. Are you assigned like long term to a particular game?
Yeah. So my team is relatively small, and we have multiple studios that we work with. So
okay.
we typically one of us is assigned as the lead researcher for a project, and that kind of helps with stakeholder and partnership management. Because I mean, one person having to answer to like 3 or 4 different teams of studios would be a little hectic.
Right.
So we typically focus on our project, but then we also help with the other projects for like the actual like report writing and reviewing. Like all of our reports go through a peer review process within the team. And then as far as like actually playtesting, since our team is smaller, we also do some of the moderation as well. So like we'll essentially run playtests for the other projects that we might not be the primary on, but we all essentially have a hand in all of the projects.
Okay, interesting. And it's just your team also running their own playtest sessions? Like, are you coordinating with like quality assurance on that, or is it just you all?
So playtest is completely run through UR. It'll typically be the lead researcher that kind of leads the sessions, and then we have user research coordinators who typically do kind of the lab tech stuff, and then also the recruitment side and getting the playtesters and just making sure all of that is organized. And then where QA comes in is we need to build the test. So we get that from dev. QA typically does, the smoke tests and things of that nature. And then we'll need a known issues list depending on what stage of development. And then we just kind of take it from there.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So actually, that leads next way. So what's like the first thing you do usually, like in preparation for a playtest?
So the first thing we do is we have to have some type of communication, whether it's a kickoff email or a meeting with the producers. Usually it's a producer that's speaking on behalf of the dev team.
Gotcha.
And then in some cases, some of the studios have embedded researchers or research coordinate or like playtest managers, whatever their role is. It's someone who's slightly more familiar with research than everyone else in the studio. Gotcha. So we'll typically have a meeting with those people and figure out what it is that the devs are looking for in terms of feedback. And then after that, we formulate the methodology. So we decide, which is it's kind of an open conversation as well. But that's also another, like, okay, you got to let us cook type of situation where we basically, we listen to what they need and then we come up with the best plan to get them the information that they need.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first step is, having that conversation and then figuring out what method we want to use to test.
Okay. And then what are some of like the core things you're really looking for like during a playtest session? What are keeping your eye out for like during a playtest session?
So typically, as part of our prep, the team, more so the lead researcher, but then it also extends to the team because it's always better to have multiple eyes on it. We kind of go through the build, and this is one of those things that builds, like your eye for it develops as you get more experience doing the testing. But we typically go through the builds and can typically anticipate any of the issues that players might have from a usability standpoint.
Okay.
So we kind of do that first. And it's not so much that we have hypothesis. It's not like that scientific about it. But we do, it is more of a validation process where it's, and that's, I didn't mention that earlier, but that's another like part of our function. Or I said it in a different way, but like if the designers, the level designers, lead designer, combat designer, they have a specific intent for how something is supposed to flow, then part of our process is validating that it actually does what they want it to do.
Okay. Interesting. And I know you mentioned a bit of this, that like some of the people that you see in the server are the people you interact with. So who do you interact with like most of the time in terms of like on the dev team?
That's honestly a tough question because we really do kind of exist in our own bubble.
Right.
But I think really we interact with QA the most, and it may just be because of how our office is set up, but then our functions are kind of adjacent as well. And I would say second to them would be whoever the producer is.
Okay. Well, here's a question for you. Who would you really like to interact more with? Where you think like you'd have some really interesting conversations, or would just really like it would help both ways if you could sit down with this person, like this person or this people more?
Ooh, to be honest, probably the creative directors and the lead designers.
Okay.
Because ultimately we're validating their ideas.
Right.
So while I completely understand and respect the corporate structure, I personally believe that like one-on-one personal, maybe not even one-on-one, but just conversations with the source are a lot easier and cleaner communication than to have to like go through several different people playing telephone.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's the game of telephone between like this person's idea of what should be done versus like when you actually get the information.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that I can understand. So this is the thing you mentioned a bit, and I'm curious to hear the answer. So, like, have there been some times where like the team went in like sort of, or maybe the developers were sort of really expecting certain results, and you came back to them and like, yeah, y'all are off, y'all are way off.
Yes, that happens frequently, to be honest. And I totally understand it because, and that's one of the conversations that I have with them. I'm just like, look, as much as I'm a scientist and a researcher in my actual role outside of work, I'm a creative. So I totally understand having your precious baby criticized or picked apart. Like, I totally get it.
Yeah.
However, I also know, because, I work on music. So one of the things that you just have to do is, as a part of making music, is listen to the song over and over and over and over. And at that point, you start losing objectivity. So you kind of have to take a step back.
Right.
They don't really have the luxury of taking a step back because it's their job to work on the game. Right. So we kind of function as that step back because we're not in the game every 40 hours a week.
Right.
We're only in it during the time that we're about to test. So it's like when sometimes they're very passionate about, this is almost there, or we've really improved on this system, and then we test it and we're just like, yeah, no, players are not feeling it at all. There's still some work to do. These are the areas where they are confused. This is what's causing the most frustration. And while I understand that you have been doing the work to improve it, you're still not there. And that is okay. That should be okay.
Yeah. We're still friends, but
yeah. And like we're all on the same team. This is not a personal attack on your ability to do your job by any means. If anything, that's it's coming straight from the players, and I'm just, I have to a certain degree, filter that. I mean, I'm obviously not going to put some quotes where somebody's like, for example, one of the running jokes about Bethesda is bug Bethesda. Yeah. So whenever if someone encounters frequent bugs, they'll drop that in every once in a while, and I'm just like, okay, I hear you, so at least someone heard you. But I'm also not going to just add that in the report because it's not constructive.
Right. Yeah, no, I see that. Actually, another thing. Have you feel like there have been times where you feel like others may be drawn the wrong result from the research data? Like they look at the data you send them and like, it means this, and they're like, that's not what that means.
Yes, and that's where we have to be really careful with how we frame things, because kind of piggybacking off of what I was saying earlier, if they feel that a particular system is improving at a certain rate, but then the hard data is saying actually no, in some cases you're actually regressing. In some, it's like you barely move the needle in terms of the actual experience.
Right.
Perfect example. So let's say 60-40. If I say 60% of people liked it, I could focus on that and make that like a highlight. However, 40% of people not liking it is very significant.
Right.
So in that sense, I may present the information as 40% of people experience this problem. And there are some times where I present it as 40% of people experience this problem, and they may look at it as, well, 60% liked it. And I'm just like, the objective is to reduce the 40%.
And I'm like, you're not wrong. What?
Yeah. So that's just it's more so just that semantics, and which I totally understand. It's a cold game out there. So you want to make sure as a dev that you are, at least showing progress or headed in the right direction. So it can get a little dicey when you have someone highlighting the negative, but then at the same time, it's like the negative doesn't get fixed if it's never highlighted.
Right. Is most of this sort of research and playtest sessions, are they like really focused heavily on like just like experience playing through the game? Do you ever do like accessibility sessions or stuff like that?
Yes. So our team has a accessibility expert, hands down. And she actually does a lot of work with Microsoft on just like the wider accessibility essentials and things of that nature. So he typically does she'll do like independent reviews, but then we also will have like a set of accessibility questions that we ask every test, because that's one of the limitations of testing accessibility is one, HIPAA, medical privacy.
Right.
So we can't, in some cases, we can't really screen for disabilities.
Right.
So we just kind of have to hope that we just so happen to get a tester in that might, be colorblind or hard of hearing or whatever the disability may be.
Yeah.
But that is something that we kind of keep within our normative testing patterns. And then, of course, being a larger publisher, also having the option of bringing accessibility consultants. So then that would be like a self-identified, usually semi-public or public figure that represents the community, and they'll come in and give their very real expertise.
Okay. Like someone who works for like DQ or something like that.
Yeah, or just for example, Steve Saylor is a known blind and low vision accessibility consultant. Like he's a great example of someone who might come in.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Another aspect, we do have we like to do inclusive design workshop. Like at the beginning of actually before studios start to actually put together artifacts, we'll do something called an inclusive design workshop where we'll have people who have different disabilities that can essentially tell their stories and talk to the devs and like answer their questions on what features would meet their needs.
Before they start building them, so it can be included beforehand and not like you got to go back and change all these things.
Exactly, because one thing I've learned very quickly is if you do accessibility on the front end, it makes development way smoother. When you have to try to patch it in later, in some cases that bridge is already burned.
Right. Because it's very easy to just build in a way that just does not account for this, and then it's like, oh, yeah, we have to redo this in order to include this.
Yeah.
Is that a thing where you feel like maybe you'd wish they had a chance to like talk to the programmers more, or give them a chance to like sit down with some of those consultants more?
Yeah, and I think a part of it is, I mean, you obviously can't really control who people interact with outside of work, but I do think that like having some level of familiarity with people from you can even go, or like I know we're talking about accessibility, but that can even go into things like representation, or of just like having meaningful relationships with people of different abilities and different cultures and things of that nature will often show itself in the work. So I know like this is slightly off topic, but on topic, that's one of the things that I find important is like making sure that those diverse voices are present.
Right.
Especially in the workplace, because it's like, okay, if that's your coworker, you're more likely to have interactions with them. So then you have more familiarity with their experiences through those conversations. So then that's something you think about when you're designing something. So
I think. Yeah, like it's much easier to explain like this is this perspective, like this is something to keep in mind when you're building. When it's like it's a perspective of someone you've like directly spoken to.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm all in support of those conversations happening early and often.
Right. So if someone was looking to sort of like maybe try and do some of this research on their own player base, what kind of like maybe like starter suggestions would you give them of things to keep in mind? Or things to definitely not do?
So I think I'll start with things to not do. Due to ease of access, I totally understand getting your friends to test your game. And I think that, yeah, and I think that is not the best. Unless your friends are industry professionals who will give you a degree of objective truth. But even with that, your target audience will likely have no idea about how the sausage is made.
Right.
And that level of that, I would say that lack of knowledge is what makes their feedback more important, in my opinion, because they don't know why something doesn't work. They just know it doesn't feel good, and they'll tell you exactly why.
Gotcha. Okay. Like that's the one I kind of expected you to hit me with.
Yeah. And then I think as far as like something that we do in our reports is we balance the qualitative or the quantitative with qualitative. So while it can be very attractive to just look at, like, let's say you're testing difficulty.
Yeah.
And let's just say that, your first round of testing, most people are saying is too hard. And let's give that a number. Let's say that's like a 3.5. And then in your next round of testing, it skews the other way where people are saying, oh, it's too easy. So let's give that like a 2.3. You might think, oh, I made the game too easy, but then like having the qualitative data and that part of the analysis is the key to understanding whether you actually made it too easy or was that particular group of people just more inclined towards puzzles. Like there are just so many variables that you have to account for, and the qualitative data is what clears the hard numbers. Like any confusion you might have about the hard numbers, the qualitative data is where you would get that information.
I see. So it's almost like that's when you want to start graphing out, like, all right, the people who listed, like, they played these games frequently, where did they rank the difficulty? Versus the people who say they play this every once in a while, where do they rank the difficulty?
Yeah. And, like, I guess if when you said player base, if you know what your target audience is and you're essentially trying to make it, about right or just right for that target audience, then that would be your guiding compass. If your goal is to, and I didn't mention that, it all depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to try to get as many people as possible, make your game approachable, but also difficult, well, not difficult, but also challenging for people on the more skilled side of the spectrum. I get that that's a much that's a much bigger challenge, but at the same time, that lets you know that it's important to get as many people as possible on both sides and in the middle of that spectrum, so that you can balance out the data.
I will definitely keep that in mind. It's because it's like when I'm thinking about my own game and like where I want to show it, I'm like, all right, no, like naturally I'm like leaning towards those more killed people, and I'm like, I can see that being a problem.
Yeah, like perfect example I give is a lot of people are inspired by Elden Ring. Elden Ring is not approachable. Like objectively, one of the least. And people who typically play Souls likes, they say Elden Ring is one of the easier Souls like games. So just that discrepancy in perception kind of lets you know, okay, if I want to make a Souls like, but I want it to be approachable, it has to be easier than Elden Ring.
Right.
But also have a level of challenge where someone who, can speed run Elden Ring, whether putting in a specific difficulty or actually, yeah, whatever, it'd probably be changing the actual difficulty. And my example of balancing Souls likes and making them approachable would be another Craft's Treasure. That, from my experience, is the most approachable Souls-like game. And then they also went the extra mile of making it even more approachable by having the mode where you can have a gun, which essentially makes that really easy.
I wanted to play that game just from seeing that.
So, yeah, it's all about one, knowing your audience, but then making sure that you're getting that balanced perspective.
So yeah, my last question before I open up to see if anyone else has questions. What would you really like to see like change or like the opportunity to do more of within like user research for games?
That's a good question. To be honest, probably testing a lot earlier.
Really?
I mean, and part of the reason I say that is like we'll typically start testing at certain milestones.
Right.
Which makes sense. I totally understand it. You want something that's like presentable to a player facing audience.
Right.
But at the same time, and I learned this, I was humbled very quickly. When I first got into UX, I knew I wanted to be a researcher, but I was doing the like Google Coursera UX design course for the certification. And I very quickly learned that UI design is not my bag. And how I figured that out is I was doing the courses and it tells you to create, just like a basic prototype, no polish, just kind of representations of icons and things of that nature. And I was working as a substitute teacher at the time. So I had some high school students look at my prototype.
Yeah.
The amount of confusion that they had, like they were just like, yeah, this app sucks. It makes no sense. And I was just like, oh my God.
You was like, yo, take back my Figma license right now.
Yes.
This is not for me.
But at the same time, I totally understood where they were coming from because, me as the designer of it, I was like, well, I know exactly what it is. It made sense to me when I was making it, but then you get to the actual user experience and then you can see like, okay, this doesn't fit people's typical mental models or heuristics of like whether it be controls, the previous games they played. Like if it just doesn't fit their previous experiences, then it won't make sense to them. Then that causes friction, and they're just like, "Nah, I want nothing to do with this." So, I think a lot of, I think a lot of time can be saved by having those ideas polished by people outside of the dev circle. Because then it's one of those situations where, let's just say, like, I keep coming to combat. So let's say your core combat loop.
Yeah.
If you're designing, the different attacks, defense, things of that nature, if you just create a combat arena, just a simple combat arena, and have user researchers test that for, 15 to 30 minutes, however long it takes to get through, just to get a feel of the combat system and then get feedback on that, that will inform a lot very early, so that's not a system that you would necessarily have to tinker with all the way down the line, where it's more of a, like, at that point you're just polishing or tweaking values rather than doing a wholesale overhaul of the system later in development.
Right. I see what you're saying. It's also funny that you said, like, just make it a reader, because I'm like, a friend of mine told me that exact thing. He's like, you don't need to build any levels. You need to just build a room, drop them in the room, let people fight, and see if they like it. Don't start building a level.
Because that's the stuff. I'm not a animation artist or anything, but that's the stuff that obviously gets people's attention.
Right.
So if you have like the most beautiful game ever, okay, I'll use Watch Dogs as an example, and I only use that as an example because people, when they show those initial trailers, the graphic fidelity was insane. Like, everyone was like, oh, this is the future of next gen consoles. And then when the game was released, it kind of, I won't say regressed, but the graphic fidelity was kind of on par with most other games.
Right.
So it's just one of those situations where I just completely speculative. I have no idea. But I imagine in that scenario, if the focus was on the core gameplay loop and that was perfected first, then that graphic fidelity probably could have been applied to the actual game.
Right. I also do think the idea of like testing earlier is an interesting answer, because I think of another dev who told me that, like, he's worked in indie game dev for 20 years, and he's like, I have never shipped a game that I wasn't embarrassed about like 20 things I want to fix.
Yeah, and that's the other part. Like, I think me being a user researcher, I can, when I play a game, I can instantly tell what are some of the things where I'm just like, dang, they ran out of time. Yeah. And I know that that's the answer, because I'm just like, there's no way that this should have been in the final ship. But, it is what it is.
Yeah. And like the other thing he said is that, like, yeah, like if you are presenting a game to players, like if you're presenting a build to players and you're not at least a little bit like, I wish I had more time, he's like, you waited too long to show them that game.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, any dev listening, to echo what you just said, absolutely test it when you're uncomfortable with it. That's the best time to test it. Because as soon as you're comfortable, you probably are set in whatever systems you created or something, and you think that should be the final thing. And it's like, depending on the timing, if that's how you feel, but then the feedback is saying, no, actually, this is not what it is. That is, I'm not in that shoe, but I feel like that's a much more stressful situation than to just get the feedback when you're already kind of hesitant about it.
Right.
Because it's just going to point you in the direction of where you need to go.
Right. You already spent 70% of the budget, and then the players are like, this sucks, do it over. You're like,
Yeah.
Right. So I think, that's all the questions from me. So I want to make sure I open up the floor to other people who have questions.
Cool. Oh, I haven't looked at the chat at all.
Yo, adjacent to she just coming through to support the homie.
Indeed. We here. I was like, I just saw Chris join. I haven't actually met him, but we talked about, because I know he's also a user researcher.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one, Johnny. All right, so from Johnny, what is a common area you see game developers making, like, sort of missteps in their game features?
To be honest, I'm actually kind of mind blown that I came up with these answers so quick. I know that it might not seem like it because I'm taking a while to answer.
Yeah. All of it.
Onboarding and menus. Onboarding is your first impression. Like, as far as the gameplay is concerned, onboarding is the first impression. If your onboarding is bad, your churn rate is going to be high.
Right.
And then menus. A lot of menu design may seem intuitive, but in some cases, it just is not. Because you want to avoid cognitive overload, but then you also want to have enough information that players can get the information that they need, and they need to be able to get to it quickly. Because if they're playing the game, they don't want to spend a whole bunch of time in menus. Like, right. I can almost guarantee everyone in here has at least one experience with the game that you didn't really care for the inventory management. So that has a lot to do with menu design. And if you're unfamiliar, I would recommend getting or learning more about tenets and traps.
I'm trying to track that to Google. What is that again?
I'm gonna put in the chat.
Okay, I was about
tenets and trap. So basically, those are design principles, where the tenets are, good design, and the traps are things that typically might seem like a good idea stylistically, but then from a user experience standpoint, ends up being a trap.
I like that question.
Okay.
I'm gonna just read it aloud for like the recording. What's your most memorable player feedback when you started as a user researcher, and it's informed a lot of your work now?
I'm gonna be honest. A lot of the funniest quotes that I've read are lost to memory. Like it especially if I put it in a report, because it's one of those things where I'm like, when I'm working on the game, I kind of become not to say that I lose myself, because that is not the case. But I do. What helps me write future reports is that I'm like an amalgamation of all the feedback that I've seen before. So a lot of the individual quotes get lost unless something like sparks my memory of it. But as far as most memorable, because I'm just like, there has to be something that I remember that's just hilarious.
Like, there's got to be one that you were like, bruh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. The pause means it's something good.
I'm also trying to make sure that I stay within NDA.
Yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. We need to turn off the recording.
You know what? For that, I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Yeah. Don't break no NDAs. Like, jokes is like, we're not trying to get anybody in trouble. Now I'm like, I'm in this like, I need to see this.
Yeah.
Oh no. That is not no.
I couldn't even get mad. I was dying of laughter in my office. I was like, there is no way, but it makes sense. I was like, he's not wrong, but excellent choice, I guess.
It's just like, he's wild, but he's also correct. I'm not
what to do here. Because that's also, I can't remember if that was a situation where they knew that I was the researcher. So I'm pretty sure, because I like, there's only been one test where I wasn't physically present, so I'm almost certain that was yeah.
I was targeted. That was a targeted comment.
So I'm just like, all right, that's cool.
I see how you are.
But oh yeah, cool. I'm glad you found that. So, and it's informed much of my work now. So that's one of those examples of, because there's a degree of relationship management with my work. Because it's always it will always be funny within a research team to share like some of the funniest or like most ridiculous quotes. But it's also one of those situations where it has fine-tuned my eye to be able to identify participants that give like actionable feedback. Because there's a difference between saying like, oh, this feels janky, this feels sluggish, boom, 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 boom. But someone who can actually describe, when I'm doing this, it feels like this. Like that's usually the feedback that I typically include.
Yeah. Like the feedback that you can take something from. Like you can like, I know what change to make and like what you expect to see, as opposed to I don't like it and I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Cause I've learned, which I knew, I mean, from like if you read any comment section on like social media gaming posts or anything, or just even the reviews in the Steam store, with the Reddit forums, whatever. And that was actually a conversation that I had with researchers during the like Games User Research Summit, is whatever opinions that you see on a Reddit forum are probably the ones that you don't want to pay that much attention to when it comes to communicating it to devs. Because that is typically representative of the like very vocal minority.
Right.
That doesn't really represent most gamers, I guess.
Right. No, I got you saying. Oh, all right. We got a question from Johnny. Are there any frameworks or tools that you could like apply, that you use, that you would like recommend to someone who's trying to like apply this sort of like research to their game?
That's a good question. So when you say tools, I immediately thought of Qualtrics because that's what we use, but I also understand that that has licenses and things of that nature, like Qualtrics and Alchemist. Google Forms, for the most part, are free. So I think if you can properly leverage Google Forms, export your data into an Excel sheet, and then kind of utilize the formulas in Excel, you can create different graphs and visualizations and things of that nature. Like if you're, let's say you're not a researcher, but you are a visual person. So looking at the different numbers of the metrics doesn't really give you the insight that you need. You can create a visualization. So then you can have, like a bar graph or something like that that can help those metrics stand out more.
Right.
And then as far as frameworks, this might sound slightly counterintuitive. But when you're reading or you're going about feedback, looking at it as if the customer is always right first, and then trickling that information through your design intent, I feel like that will lead you closer to an enjoyable experience for your audience rather than, oh, this is my beautiful art and people are going to like it or they're not going to like it.
Right.
Because that can be tough. I think we all, to a certain degree, enjoy money. Unless you're giving your game out for free, then that's cool too.
I think Johnny said we can all get free copies of everything Alchemy Lab makes. He's gonna hold us down.
Oh, nice.
No, these type me. No, I tried, guys. Sorry.
Oh.
Let me make sure there's no questions. I didn't miss. I think that all of them.
Cool.
All right, so thank you very much for your time. This has been fantastic. Yeah, definitely hit up Jason so y'all can spend some time getting into Qualtrics. And also, again, everyone, I always appreciate you all coming to these. It is always great to just, sit down and just talk with our peers and what cool stuff are we all up to. Jason, our previous, presenter of Fireside Chat, thanks so much for stopping by. Usually people will hang out in the chat and chill channel after this. So everyone, if you got to bounce, that's fine. If, you can stop by, that's great. But yeah, this is it for the evening. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank y'all.